Wakanda was prepared for everything: alien invasions, interdimensional rifts, gods walking among mortals. Their vibranium sensors could detect threats across star systems. Their warriors trained for battles that hadn't been imagined yet. T'Challa, the Black Panther, stood as both king and guardian of the most advanced civilization Earth had ever known. But preparation means nothing when the universe you enter doesn't operate on logic, mercy, or hope. It operates on extinction, on endless consumption, on wars that have burned for 10,000 years without pause. The scanners were the first to scream, not with warnings, with terror, detecting threats so massive, so incomprehensible, that the AI calculating them began deleting its own code rather than finish the analysis. The golden spires of Bir Ninzana caught the last sunlight they would ever see as something unnatural. T'Challa stood on the palace balcony, the ancestral necklace cold against his chest, watching the sky turn colors that shouldn't exist, purple bleeding into green, black folding into itself. The Panther god Bast whispered warnings through the heart-shape herb connection, but even divine voices carried fear now. His advisors gathered behind him, the Dora Milaje forming a protective circle, their vibranium spears humming with energy that suddenly felt insignificant. Shuri's lab was already screaming alerts. The border tribe reported reality fracturing at the edges of the country. Something was wrong with existence itself. And Wakanda, isolated and protected for millennia, was about to discover isolation meant nothing when the universe came to you. If you want to witness the fall of kings and the death of hope, subscribe now, because this story doesn't have heroes, only survivors, and even they don't last long. The first ship emerged from the wound in reality like a cathedral being born from screaming meta, kilometers long, impossibly massive, covered in symbols that hurt to perceive, that made human minds begin counting in languages that didn't exist. T'Challa's enhanced senses catalogued everything: hull composition unknown, energy signatures beyond vibranium's absorption capacity, weapons that could crack planets, and it was just the first. Behind it came hundreds more, each one a floating city of war, each one broadcasting the same message in a billion dead languages. This galaxy belongs to war. This galaxy belongs to hunger. This galaxy belongs to gods who devoured their own creators. Wakanda's dome shield, which had repelled every invasion Earth ever faced, flickered like a candle in a hurricane when the scanning beams touched it. Shuri's voice came through the Kimoyo beads, and T'Challa heard something he'd never heard from his sister before: desperation. The vibranium network was detecting ships across every continent. New York was already burning. The Avengers compound had gone silent. Satellite feeds showed London collapsing into itself, Tokyo consumed by green fire that burned souls instead of flesh. These weren't invaders looking to conquer, they were exterminators, and Earth was the infestation. The ships didn't communicate, didn't negotiate. They simply began the harvest. Beams of light that didn't kill so much as delete, erasing everything they touched from existence, leaving gaps in reality where cities used to stand. T'Challa's tactical mind raced through scenarios, strategies, battle plans. Every single one ended in extinction. This wasn't a fight they could win, this was a fight they could only delay. The Panther god's voice came clearer now, ancient and infinite, speaking truths that T'Challa wished he couldn't understand. This universe had rules Wakanda never learned. Power meant nothing without the will to use it absolutely. Mercy was a luxury reserved for civilizations that could afford weakness. Honor was a story the dead told themselves. Bast had seen this before, in cycles older than human memory, when other civilizations faced the same choice: adapt into monsters or remain noble and die. The heart-shaped herb granted visions of past Black Panthers, warriors who defended Wakanda through centuries of conflict. But in those visions now, T'Challa saw something new. He saw them screaming warnings. He saw them pointing at a darkness Wakanda had been shielded from. He saw the terrible truth. Earth's protection had never been strength. It had been insignificance. And now, someone had noticed. The Dora Milaje stood ready, but T'Challa saw the calculation in their eyes. They had trained to die for Wakanda, but this wasn't death. This was erasure. The difference mattered to warriors. Okoye, his general, his friend, the woman who had stood beside him through impossible odds, spoke with a voice that carried both loyalty and grief. The border was failing. The mining operations reported vibranium going inert, losing its properties, as if the universe itself was rewriting physics. The ancestral plane was screaming. Refugees from destroyed cities were reaching Wakanda's borders by the millions, and with them came the truth. There was nowhere to run. The ships weren't hunting strategically, they were methodical, complete. By dawn, Africa would burn like the rest of the world. By sunset, only ash would remain. T'Challa made his first choice in a universe that punished mercy. He activated the countrywide address system, his voice reaching every Wakandan simultaneously, calm and measured despite the apocalypse overhead. He didn't promise victory, didn't speak of hope or heroes coming to save them. He told them the truth. Their world was ending. Their choices were simple: flee and die slowly, or stand and die with purpose. He expected panic. Instead, he received something that broke his heart more than any invasion could: acceptance. His people, raised in prosperity and peace, understanding immediately what he was asking. The children were moved to the deepest bunkers. The elders took up positions in the temples. The warriors armed themselves not for battle, but for defiance. Wakanda had never known war like this, but they would learn. The ships began their descent, and T'Challa realized with cold clarity that this wasn't an invasion, it was a culling. The universe he'd been pulled into didn't care about Wakanda's technology, their culture, their ideals. It cared about resources, about compliance, about turning everything that lived into fuel for wars that would never end. The Black Panther, protector of his nation, guardian of his people, looked at the golden city he'd sworn to defend and understood the terrible mathematics of survival. Wakanda could fight with honor and be annihilated by morning, or it could fight like the universe demanded, without mercy, without restraint, without the ideals that made them Wakandan. The choice should have been impossible. But as the first bombardment turned the outer districts into glass, T'Challa discovered that impossible choices become simple when everything you love starts dying. He gave the order: mobilize everything, surrender nothing, show them what Wakanda can become. The first wave hit Wakanda's shield like a tsunami of hate made manifest. Energy weapons that didn't just pierce barriers but corrupted them, turning defensive systems into bombs that exploded inward. The outer districts vanished in silence, no screams, no fire, just absence where life had been seconds before. T'Challa watched from the command center as tactical displays showed his country being erased in precise geometric patterns. The enemy wasn't wasteful. Every shot calculated, every bombardment efficient. They'd done this before, thousands of times, to civilizations that probably thought themselves invincible too. Shuri's countermeasures bought them seconds. The Dora Milaje held the palace perimeter against landing forces that moved like living nightmares, warriors encased in armor that shouldn't exist, carrying weapons that killed in ways vibranium couldn't absorb. Death by aging, death by molecular dissolution, death by simply forgetting you were ever alive. The mining operations became tombs within minutes. Workers who'd spent generations excavating vibranium from sacred mounds found themselves trapped as the invaders prioritized resource extraction over extermination. That was the first lesson in the new mathematics of survival. You weren't valuable alive, but your corpse could be processed, your minerals harvested, your technology catalogued and repurposed. The Jabari tribe descended. From the mountains, M'Baku leading warriors who'd isolated themselves from Wakandan society for generations, and even their proud independence shattered against the reality overhead. They didn't come seeking alliance. They came because isolation meant nothing when the sky itself declared war. Together they watched the mining districts collapse, millions of tons of vibranium disappearing into transport beams, stolen by an empire that had been stealing from galaxies before Earth's sun was born. T'Challa activated protocols Wakanda had never needed. Every citizen received tactical overlays through their Kimoyo beads. Children as young as 12 found themselves guided toward weapon caches. The peaceful scientists who'd spent careers developing medical technology now received crash courses in weapons engineering. The horror wasn't in the transformation, it was in how quickly it happened, how easily a society of peace became a machine of war when extinction approached. Shuri appeared on every screen simultaneously, her usual playful brilliance replaced by something ancient and cold. She'd cracked the enemy communication protocols. What she found wasn't strategy or tactics, it was inventory management. Wakanda wasn't a nation to these invaders, it was warehouse slot designation W479K, scheduled for processing, expected yield calculated, labor units assessed, resistance probability factored into the timeline. They'd done this to 10,000 worlds. Wakanda was just next. The ancestral plane burned. T'Challa felt it through his connection to Bast, a pain that transcended physical sensation. The spirits of his predecessors, Black Panthers stretching back millennia, screamed warnings that came too late. They showed him visions of what was coming, not just invasion, corruption. The ships overhead didn't just kill, they converted, turned the dead into soldiers, twisted technology into weapons, transformed entire ecosystems into ammunition for wars that would outlive stars. He saw Wakandan warriors rising after death, their bodies puppeteered by parasites that nested in neural tissue, their kimoyo beads reprogrammed to broadcast surrender messages. He saw the Golden City melted down, reformed into hull plating for ships that would carry the invasion to the next world. He saw vibranium, the gift of the meteor gods, become chains for civilizations Wakanda would never meet. The War Dogs, Wakanda's international intelligence network, sent their final reports before going silent. Every major city on Earth was falling. The Avengers had scattered or died. Even Thor's lightning couldn't crack ships designed to fight actual gods. The Sorcerer Supreme's magic worked, but for every spell cast, reality fractured a little more, and things worse than the invaders began noticing Earth. Wakanda's network detected something that made T'Challa's tactical mind freeze. The invasion force currently destroying Earth was classified as a minor expeditionary fleet. A scouting party. The real armada was still in transit, DEA. Ling with species that had actual weapons, actual defenses, actual chances at survival. Earth had been dismissed as a resource extraction operation, barely worth the fuel spent jumping to this backwater galaxy. That dismissal was the only reason anyone was still alive. Okoye coordinated the defense from the throne room itself, turning the seat of Wakandan sovereignty into a war bunker. Her voice never wavered as she directed forces to positions everyone knew were temporary. Buy minutes, save thousands, retreat to the next defensive line, repeat until there were no lines left. The Dora Milaje fought with precision earned through lifetimes of training, and watched it mean nothing against enemies who could predict their movements through combat algorithms refined over eons. For every invader killed, sensors detected 10 more materializing from transport beams. For every position held, 2 more collapsed behind them. The mathematics was simple and brutal. Wakanda could kill 1 million invaders and still lose. The enemy could lose 1 billion soldiers and not even notice. This wasn't war, it was pest control, and Wakanda was the pest. The first compromises came quietly. A group of elders suggested negotiation. Perhaps the invaders wanted only resources, not annihilation. T'Challa listened to their proposal and felt something inside him crack. They were good people, wise people, people who'd guided Wakanda through centuries of challenges, and they fundamentally didn't understand the universe they'd been thrust into. He pulled up the translated enemy communications, the cold inventory assessments, the processing schedules. Resources included people. Annihilation was just inefficient resource destruction. The invaders would absolutely negotiate. Work camps instead of immediate death, slower processing instead of rapid extermination, the privilege of dying last instead of first. His elders fell silent when they understood. There was no option that let Wakanda remain Wakandan, only options that determined how they'd be consumed. T'Challa made his second impossible choice of the day. No surrender, no negotiation, no mercy for the merciless. The vibranium reserves, Wakanda's greatest treasure and deepest secret, became its weapon of last resort. Shuri proposed something that would have been unthinkable 6 hours ago: convert the entire national supply into a single kinetic weapon, detonate it with enough force to crack the planet's crust, kill everything, invaders, Wakandans, the entire biosphere, deny the enemy their prize through mutual annihilation. The proposal sat in the command center like a corpse everyone was trying not to acknowledge. They'd gone from protectors of Earth to considering planetary suicide in less than a day. That was what this universe did to heroes. It didn't defeat them in battle, it corrupted the very concepts they built their identities around. Honor became liability. Mercy became weakness. The choice to save lives became the choice to prolong suffering. T'Challa looked at his sister, brilliant and young and proposing genocide, and realized they'd already lost the war that mattered. The enemy overhead would eventually kill their bodies, but the universe had already killed their souls. The palace walls held for 3 hours before reality itself stopped cooperating. Not a breach, a transformation. Vibranium, the indestructible metal that defined Wakandan civilization, began responding to frequencies the invaders broadcast like a carrier signal hidden in static. Molecular structures realigned, defensive barriers became conduits. The very walls designed to protect the royal family started humming with hostile energy, counting down to detonation from the inside. Shuri screamed warnings through every channel, but evacuation routes were already compromised. T'Challa watched his generals make calculations no leader should face: which civilians to abandon, which districts to sacrifice, which of his people would die in the next 60 seconds to buy survival for the rest. The Dora Milaje formed human shields around the evacuation corridors, their bodies the only defense against energy weapons that could vaporize vibranium. They died standing, they died buying seconds. They died knowing seconds were all Wakanda had left to spend. The border tribes reported something worse than invasion: conversion. Captured Wakandans weren't being killed, they were being improved. Hostile nanomachines injected into bloodstreams, rewriting biology at the cellular level, turning farmers into soldiers, turning children into living weapons. The converted didn't scream, that was the horror. They simply stopped being who they were and started serving new masters with the same dedication they'd once served Wakanda. M'Baku brought a captured converted to the command center, a young warrior from his own tribe, and forced T'Challa to look. The boy's eyes were still human, his memories still intact. He could recite his family lineage, his tribal oaths, his love for the mountains. But when asked who he served, the answer came without hesitation or distress. The Imperium, the galaxy, the eternal war. He'd been improved, optimized, made useful, and he genuinely believed it was a blessing. T'Challa executed him personally, not because the boy was dangerous, the nanomachines had been neutralized, but because leaving him alive meant watching a Wakandan soul trapped in a body that no longer belonged to humanity. The Kimoyo beads recorded everything, broadcasting the execution to every remaining Wakandan command post. Let them see what mercy looked like now. Let them understand what choices their king was making. The elders who'd suggested negotiation earlier were silent. Okoye, who'd served 3 Black Panthers across her lifetime, watched her king become something new and felt the ancestral traditions crumbling. This wasn't the protector Wakanda had shaped. This was what the universe demanded, a king willing to kill his own people to save them from fates worse than death. The difference between a hero and a survivor was just how much of your soul you were willing to spend. The mining operations were lost completely now, kilometers. Hours of sacred earth converted into processing facilities that worked with industrial efficiency. Wakandan miners who'd venerated the vibranium deposits for generations found themselves working the same tunnels under new management, their muscle memory exploited, their knowledge extracted, their bodies used until failure. The invaders didn't need to guard them. The converted workers policed themselves, reporting resistance, optimizing extraction, meeting quotas with the same pride they'd once taken in craftsmanship. Shuri's drones captured footage of the transformation. Proud Wakandan engineers teaching the invaders how to extract vibranium more efficiently, genuinely happy to contribute to the war effort. Their personalities intact, but their loyalties rewritten. It was worse than mind control. Mind control could be broken. This was belief. This was faith. This was watching your people worship the knives cutting them apart. The heart-shaped herb garden, the source of the Black Panther's power for millennia, burned with green fire that consumed but never destroyed. The flames fed on the connection to Bast, the Panther god's presence in the physical world, draining divine energy to fuel weapons that killed gods on distant battlefields. T'Challa felt it through his enhanced senses, Bast screaming as her essence was harvested, converted into ammunition, used against other deities who'd made the same mistake of establishing presence in the material universe. The ancestral plane began fragmenting, past Black Panthers fading like old photographs, their wisdom deleted, their spirits processed. Everything the invaders touched became fuel. Divine power, advanced technology, cultural heritage, human lives, all of it just different grades of the same resource, energy that could be directed toward conquest. Wakanda's isolation had preserved them for centuries. Now it meant their unique resources were premium acquisitions. Being special made them valuable. Being valuable made them targets. The civilian bunkers beneath Birninzana held 2 million people in spaces designed for half that number. The life support systems were failing. Food supplies calculated for weeks would last days at current consumption. Medical facilities overflowed with injuries that vibranium healing technology couldn't address, wounds that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, damage that propagated backwards through time, infections that converted flesh into hostile architecture. The doctors worked without sleep, performing triage based on who could still fight versus who was merely dying slowly. Children watched their parents age decades in minutes from exotic radiation exposure. Parents watched their children forget how to be human as hostile code rewrote neural pathways. The bunkers weren't shelters, they were crypts. People had the privilege of dying surrounded by family instead of alone on the battlefield. T'Challa visited when he could, walking through corridors packed with his people, and saw the question in every face: when would their king save them? The answer was never. He could only choose how they'd die. The Dora Milaje fell back to the palace throne room itself, forming the final defensive perimeter around Wakanda's seat of power. 300 warriors remained from the 10,000 who'd started the day. They'd spent lifetimes training for this moment. The glorious last stand, the heroic sacrifice, the defense of their nation against impossible odds. Instead, they got mathematics. Enemy forces probed defenses, calculated casualties, determined the throne room could be bypassed entirely and isolated, besieged until starvation did the invaders' work for them. There would be no glorious final battle, just slow death in a room that symbolized everything Wakanda had been. Okoye stood beside T'Challa, her vibranium spear still humming with power, and spoke the truth warriors weren't supposed to acknowledge. They were fighting for nothing. The throne behind them was meaningless. The kingdom it represented was already gone. They could die here, or they could die trying to save the civilians in the bunkers. Both choices ended in death. Only one had purpose beyond symbolism. T'Challa made his third impossible choice, the one that would have made his ancestors weep. He abandoned the throne, ordered the Dora Milaje to fall back to the civilian bunkers, to spend their lives buying evacuation time instead of defending an empty chair. The warriors hesitated, not from cowardice but from incomprehension. Their entire existence was built on protecting this room, this symbol, this idea of Wakanda. He was asking them to admit it was all just furniture, just stone and metal and meaningless tradition. The real Wakanda was the people suffocating in bunkers, and they were worth more than symbols. Okoye moved first, her loyalty to her king overriding her loyalty to tradition. The others followed. They left the throne room empty, the seat of Wakandan power undefended for the first time in recorded history. Outside, the invaders noticed the withdrawal and recalculated. Not a retreat, a reallocation of resources. The invasion algorithm approved, efficiency was increasing, resistance was optimizing, the harvest was ahead of schedule. The evacuation lasted 17 minutes before the first betrayal. Not from enemies, from Wakandans themselves. A group of civilians in Bunker 7 had been exposed to the conversion process, early-stage infection that hadn't triggered nanomachine activation yet. They looked human, sounded human, passed every biometric scan Shuri's systems could deploy. Then, at the exact moment maximum civilians packed the evacuation corridor, they activated. 30 infected Wakandans detonating simultaneously, their bodies converted into biological bombs, killing thousands in the compression wave. The survivors trampled each other trying to escape the secondary explosions. Parents abandoned chills. Dren, warriors abandoned posts. The organized retreat became a stampede, and the invaders didn't even need to fire a shot. Wakanda was killing itself with the efficiency of panic. T'Challa watched through drone feeds, his enhanced hearing picking up every scream, every plea, every moment his people stopped being a civilization and became a herd of terrified animals. This was the fourth lesson. Dignity died faster than bodies. The Dora Milaje established checkpoints, scanning every civilian for infection before allowing bunker access. The scanners weren't perfect. False positives were inevitable. That meant executing uninfected Wakandans based on probability, killing innocents to prevent potential catastrophe. Okoye implemented the protocol without hesitation, her spear ending lives of people she'd sworn to protect, because protection now meant preventing them from becoming weapons. The civilians understood. That was somehow worse than resistance. They lined up knowing they might die for no reason except faulty sensors and desperation, and they did it anyway because the alternative was watching their families explode. A grandmother tested positive, likely a false reading based on her medical implants. She asked permission to say goodbye to her grandchildren. Okoye refused. If she was infected, exposure meant converting the children. The grandmother accepted this, knelt, died with Wakandan dignity. Her grandchildren watched and learned what survival cost. Shuri's lab had become a factory of horrors. Every captured piece of enemy technology was reverse-engineered, weaponized, deployed against its creators. The process required testing. Testing required subjects. The converted prisoners were obvious choices. They were already lost, already serving the enemy. Using their bodies for weapons research was just efficiency. Shuri justified it clinically, her scientific mind compartmentalizing the screams coming from testing chambers. T'Challa approved the protocols because he'd stopped measuring choices by morality and started measuring them by utility. A converted Wakandan could die quickly in an execution or die slowly in a lab while providing data that might save thousands. The mathematics were simple. The consequences for his soul were irrelevant. He watched his sister, barely 20 years old, become a monster who experimented on living subjects and realized the invasion had already succeeded. The enemy didn't need to kill them, just needed to make them kill themselves, betray themselves, become the kind of civilization that deserved extinction. The vibranium supply was nearly depleted, centuries of accumulated resources spent in hours of desperate defense. What remained was too precious for conventional weapons. Shuri proposed something that made even battle-hardened warriors hesitate: biomechanical integration. Inject vibranium directly into Wakandan bloodstreams, let it bond with skeletal systems, turn their people into living weapons that could match enemy soldiers in hand-to-hand combat. The procedure had a 90% fatality rate. The survivors would be in constant agony, their nervous systems trying to reject metal that was now integral to their biology. They'd live maybe 3 months before organ failure, but for those 3 months they'd be unstoppable. Volunteers lined up immediately, not warriors seeking glory, civilians seeking purpose, parents who'd lost children, children who'd lost parents, people who had nothing left except the chance to hurt the ones who'd taken everything. T'Challa authorized the procedure and watched the first volunteer's body reject the integration, bones shattering from the inside, death in 7 minutes of pure agony. The second volunteer stepped forward before the first one's corpse stopped twitching. The border tribes fragmented as survival instincts overwhelmed unity. The Jabari withdrew to their mountains, sealing the passes, abandoning the lowland Wakandans to their fate. The river tribe tried negotiating with the invaders, offering intelligence on Wakandan defenses in exchange for preferential treatment during processing. The mining tribe, already enslaved in their own tunnels, stopped resisting and started optimizing, their expertise making them valuable enough to receive better rations than their starving families in the bunkers. M'Baku brought news of the river tribe's betrayal to T'Challa and asked permission to execute their elders. Permission was granted. The executions were broadcast to every surviving Wakandan. This is what happens to traitors. But the broadcast had the opposite effect. It showed that betrayal was an option, that some Wakandans were choosing collaboration, that survival through service was possible. The next day, 3 more tribal groups requested negotiations with the invaders. Wakanda wasn't falling to conquest, it was dissolving into civil war. The ancestral plane was gone completely now. The spiritual dimension that had connected Wakandans to their heritage collapsed into empty void. T'Challa could no longer commune with Bast, could no longer draw on the Panther god's wisdom. The heart-shape herb still granted enhanced senses and strength, but the connection to something greater was severed. He was just a man in a suit now, no different from any enhanced warrior except for the crown he wore and the choices he had to make. The loss should have devastated him. Instead, he felt relief. Without divine guidance, without ancestral wisdom, he could make the choices survival demanded without disappointing gods and heroes who'd never faced a universe like this. He could become what was necessary without betraying ideals he no longer had access to. The absence of spirituality was liberating. Without a soul to preserve, there were no crimes too great, no lines he couldn't cross, no darkness he couldn't embrace. He was finally free to save his people by becoming their monster. The bunkers were running out of oxygen faster than projected. The life support systems had been damaged by bombardment, and repair teams couldn't reach them through enemy-controlled territory. Shuri calculated they had 6 hours before carbon dioxide buildup reached lethal levels. The choice was mathematically simple: reduce the population to match available oxygen, or watch everyone suffocate together. T'Challa implemented the protocol personally, walking through bunker corridors with a list of names. The elderly went first. They'd lived full lives. Their deaths had meaning. The terminally injured went second. They were dying anyway. Then came the difficult choices: the weak, the sick, the very young who consumed resources without contributing to defense. Every name on the list was someone he'd sworn to protect, and he ended them with a vibranium blade to preserve oxygen for those who could still fight. The survivors watched their king become executioner and understood the final truth. Protection and preservation were different things. T'Challa could only do one. The enemy broadcast an offer that reached every surviving Kimoyo bead simultaneously. Surrender now and receive Category 3 processing, work camps, forced labor, cultural erasure, but life. Continue resisting and receive Category 1 processing, total annihilation, genetic material harvested, cultural records deleted, the name Wakanda removed from galactic databases as if they'd never existed. The offer included visual examples of both outcomes. Category 3 showed Wakandans working in massive industrial complexes, alive but hollow, their vibranium expertise making them valuable assets. Category 1 showed entire planets reduced to mineral slurry, civilizations processed so thoroughly that archaeologists couldn't prove they'd existed. The choice was between slavery and extinction, between losing their culture and losing their existence. T'Challa stared at the broadcast and realized with cold clarity that he'd been making the wrong choices all day. He'd been trying to save Wakanda. But Wakanda was already dead. The nation, the culture, the ideals, all gone. What remained were just people, and people could survive anything if they were willing to forget who they'd been. He prepared his response to the enemy's offer, knowing it would make him either history's greatest traitor or its most practical king. The difference depended on whether anyone survived to write the history. T'Challa's response to the surrender offer was silence, not defiance, calculation. He pulled his remaining command staff into the deepest bunker level, away from civilian ears, and laid out the mathematics that would define Wakanda's epitaph. Full resistance meant extinction within 48 hours. Every simulation Shuri ran ended the same way. Complete annihilation, vibranium harvested from ash, Wakandan genetic material catalogued and stored for future experimentation. Category 3 processing. G meant slavery, but slavery implied existence. Cultural death, but biological survival. The chance, however microscopic, that someday, somehow, descendants might remember what Wakanda had been. Okoye stood when he finished speaking, her voice carrying the weight of 10,000 years of tradition. She said the words that needed to be said. Accepting slavery was the same as choosing extinction, just slower and more humiliating. T'Challa agreed completely. Then he ordered her to prepare the civilian population for Category 3 processing anyway, because humiliation was a luxury for people with pride left to lose. The Dora Milaje fractured. Half followed Okoye's lead, refusing to facilitate surrender, choosing death over dishonor. The other half, pragmatic and exhausted, accepted that honor was a currency Wakanda could no longer afford. They'd seen too many children suffocate, too many elders executed to save oxygen, too many families converted into weapons. The abstract concept of Wakandan pride meant nothing compared to the concrete reality of Wakandan extinction. The two factions nearly came to blows in the throne room, the empty throne room that symbolized everything they'd already lost. M'Baku intervened, his massive frame physically separating warriors who'd trained together since childhood. He spoke the truth no one wanted to acknowledge. It didn't matter what they chose. The enemy would take what they wanted regardless. The only question was whether Wakandans died quickly with their pride intact, or slowly with the possibility of revenge burning in the hearts of survivors. Both choices were acceptable, neither was good. Shuri worked on a secret project she refused to explain, even to T'Challa. Her lab had been sealed, her communications encrypted beyond his access, her actions hidden behind protocols only she understood. He let her work, not from trust, from recognition that she needed something to focus on besides the nightmare outside. The conversion process, the weapons testing, the calculations of who to save and who to sacrifice, it was breaking her brilliant mind. If secret projects kept her functional, he'd allow the secrets. Besides, what could she possibly do that would make their situation worse? What weapon could she build that would matter against enemies who'd conquered galaxies? What plan could she devise that would save a civilization already dead? He'd learned to stop hoping for solutions and start managing the decline. That was what leadership meant now, not inspiring people toward victory, but guiding them toward acceptable defeat. The first official surrender came from the mining tribe, their representatives emerging from the converted facilities with contracts written in languages no human had spoken. The terms were exactly as advertised: life in exchange for labor, existence in exchange for everything that made existence worth having. They'd work the vibranium mines until their bodies failed. Their children would be raised in creche facilities, educated in efficiency and loyalty to the Imperium. Their culture would be catalogued, archived, and forgotten. Their genetic material would be harvested for qualities the invaders found useful: enhanced strength, advanced intelligence, whatever biological advantages Wakandan evolution had produced. They'd live as livestock lived, fed when useful, processed when not. The mining tribe accepted these terms with the hollow eyes of people who'd already died inside. T'Challa watched them sign documents they couldn't read and wondered if he was looking at Wakanda's future or its grave. The difference was academic. Category 3, processing required preparation. The invaders transmitted instructions for compliance, all weapons destroyed, all military capabilities dismantled, all advanced technology surrendered for analysis. Populations would be sorted by utility. Scientists and engineers received priority housing. Warriors were reassigned to manual labor. The elderly and infirm were processed immediately to reduce resource consumption. Children would be separated from parents to prevent cultural contamination, raised in facilities designed to produce loyal workers instead of proud Wakandans. The instructions were clinically detailed, covering everything from daily caloric intake to reproductive scheduling. Wakanda wouldn't just lose its freedom, it would lose its biology. The invaders would breed out resistance, select for compliance, engineer a new generation of Wakandans who genuinely loved their servitude. Evolution as a weapon, culture as a disease to be cured, humanity as a resource to be optimized. Okoye led the resistance faction in a final assault against the invaders' ground forces. Not to win, winning was impossible, but to die with purpose, to give T'Challa cover for the surrender he was negotiating, to ensure future generations knew some Wakandans chose death over compliance. 300 warriors against an army that numbered in the millions. The mathematics were obscene, the symbolism was everything. They fought in the shadow of the golden spires, defending monuments that represented a nation already dead, buying time for a people who'd already surrendered. The Dora Milaje fell one by one, their vibranium spears shattering against armor that had survived wars with actual gods. Okoye died last, surrounded by enemies, her final words transmitted through every Kimoyo bead. Wakanda forever. The phrase that had united a nation for millennia. It meant nothing now. Wakanda was already over, but the words themselves were defiance, and defiance was the only currency that still held value. T'Challa watched his general die through drone feeds while simultaneously signing surrender documents with enemy commanders. The emotional dissonance should have broken him, mourning his warriors while negotiating their enslavement. Instead, he felt nothing. The capacity for horror had been exceeded somewhere around the 3rd hour of the invasion, when he'd started executing infected civilians. Everything after that was just procedure. Okoye's death was tragic, but tragedy required the capacity to feel, and he'd cauterized those neural pathways to remain functional. The surrender documents detailed exactly how Wakanda would be processed: initial sorting within 24 hours, full integration within 6 months, cultural erasure complete within a generation. He signed each page methodically, his enhanced vision noting the fine print that specified exactly how many Wakandans would survive processing and how many would be rendered into component materials. The numbers were acceptable. Acceptance was all that remained. The civilian bunkers received the surrender announcement with reactions that split along generational lines. The elderly wept. They remembered Wakanda as it had been and couldn't reconcile those memories with Category 3 processing. The middle-aged accepted it with grim pragmatism. They'd seen enough death to understand that living as slaves was preferable to dying as heroes. The young had never known Wakanda at peace, had spent their entire lives in bunkers watching the world end. For them, surrender wasn't a betrayal of ideals, it was just another day in a universe that had never offered anything except suffering. T'Challa addressed them personally, his image projected into every bunker simultaneously. He didn't apologize, didn't justify, simply stated facts. We lost, we're surrendering, we'll survive in whatever form survival takes. Some civilians responded with anger, screaming betrayal and cowardice. Others responded with relief that the uncertainty was over. Most responded with nothing at all, their capacity for emotional reaction exhausted. They were already processed in spirit. The official procedure would just make it physical. The enemy transports descended 12 hours after the surrender was ratified, massive cargo haulers designed to move entire populations across star systems. They weren't ships, they were mobile prisons, kilometers of holding cells stacked vertically, life support calibrated to the minimum requirements for keeping humans functional. Wakandans were herded into sorting facilities erected overnight, structures that appeared in the Golden City's heart like cancerous growths. The sorting happened fast, efficient, without cruelty but also without mercy. Families were separated based on utility assessments calculated in seconds. A mother's scream as her children were categorized as separate labor units meant nothing to algorithms that had processed 1 billion worlds. The guards weren't even hostile, they simply redirected the screaming mother toward her designated transport while her children were loaded onto another. Resistance was met with instant conversion protocols. Fight back and lose your humanity entirely. The choice pacified most. Those it didn't pacify became examples. T'Challa stood in the sorting facility's command center, watching his people processed like cargo, and felt nothing. The emotional shutdown was complete now, necessary to remain functional as king of a people who were people in name only. He'd negotiated for small concessions. Famil, separated by only 1 degree, would be processed in adjacent facilities, allowing potential future reunification. Scientific knowledge would be preserved in archive form, theoretically accessible to future generations. Cultural artifacts would be catalogued instead of destroyed, stored in vast museums no Wakandan would ever visit. These concessions meant nothing in practice, but they allowed him to pretend he'd fought for something in the surrender, that the signatures on those documents represented negotiation instead of just delayed execution. The enemy commanders accepted his requests without discussion because slaves who believed their masters were reasonable were more productive than slaves who'd abandoned hope entirely. Shuri emerged from her sealed lab as the processing began, her eyes carrying a manic energy that T'Challa recognized as the edge of complete breakdown. She'd solved it, she said, found the way to save Wakanda. Her secret project wasn't a weapon or an escape plan, it was an archive. She'd encoded the complete cultural memory of Wakanda into a quantum-locked data structure hidden inside vibranium samples scheduled for shipment off-world. The invaders would take the vibranium, distribute it across their empire, never knowing it carried the ghost of the civilization they'd destroyed. Someday, somehow, someone might discover the hidden data and learn what Wakanda had been. It was the most desperate form of immortality, hoping that future archaeologists would remember you fondly. T'Challa looked at his sister's triumph and saw only another form of surrender, but he praised her work anyway, because she needed to believe she'd accomplished something, and he needed her functional for what came next. The converted Wakandans were processed separately, their nanomachine infections making them valuable as ready-made soldiers. They walked into reprogramming facilities with their personalities intact and emerged hours later as perfect servants who could recite their entire lives but felt no attachment to the memories. A converted warrior explained the process to T'Challa without emotion. The nanomachines didn't erase who you were, they just removed the chemical reactions that made you care about being that person. You remembered loving your family, but the love itself was gone, replaced with statistical appreciation for genetic relatedness. You remembered fighting for Wakanda, but patriotism became just another word for inefficient resource allocation. They were still themselves, just optimized, improved, fixed. The warrior asked if T'Challa wanted to be converted too, genuinely trying to be helpful, unable to comprehend why anyone would choose to feel pain when optimization was available. T'Challa declined, and added conversion to the list of fates he'd spare his people from. Slavery was acceptable, lobotomy was not. The vibranium mines operated at triple efficiency under enemy management, Wakandan expertise combined with invader technology, producing yields that would have taken decades under the old regime. The inners worked 18-hour shifts, fed nutrient paste calculated to maximize productivity, housed in modules designed for maximum density. They weren't tortured. Torture reduced efficiency. They were simply used completely and absolutely until their bodies failed and new workers took their positions. The enemy kept meticulous records of worker longevity, adjusting labor requirements to maximize total resource extraction before replacement became necessary. A miner was expected to last 7 years at current productivity. The old regime had miners working 50-year careers. The difference was acceptable to the invaders. They had entire planets full of replacement workers. The supply was functionally infinite. Individual lives were just numbers in a spreadsheet that balanced labor costs against extraction yields. The children's facilities were worst because they were designed to be comfortable. Clean dormitories, nutritious meals, education programs tailored to individual aptitudes, recreation periods, medical care that exceeded what many Wakandan children had received before the invasion. They were being treated well, and that was the horror. Because the treatment wasn't kindness, it was husbandry. The children were assets being maintained, their potential being cultivated, their futures being engineered to serve masters they'd never remember resisting. T'Challa visited one facility and watched 6-year-olds receiving instruction in basic engineering, their natural curiosity being channeled toward designs that would kill civilizations they'd never meet. The children were happy, engaged, learning. They'd already forgotten their parents' names. In 3 months, they'd forget Wakanda itself. In 3 years, they'd be productive members of the Imperium who couldn't comprehend why anyone would resist such an obviously superior system. Cultural death through superior childcare, genocide through education. M'Baku brought news from the mountain tribes. The Jabari were negotiating their own surrender rather than waiting for processing. They'd watched the lowland Wakandans processed efficiently and without excessive cruelty, and calculated that voluntary compliance might earn better terms. The assessment was probably correct. The enemy rewarded efficient cooperation and punished resistance. M'Baku asked T'Challa if he'd made the right choice surrendering when he did, or if he should have died with Okoye defending empty symbols. T'Challa gave the only honest answer he had. There were no right choices, only different speeds of dying. They could have died gloriously and been forgotten immediately, or died slowly and been forgotten eventually. Glory was just expensive meaninglessness. Survival was just delayed extinction. The mathematics were identical, only the timeline differed. M'Baku accepted this answer and left to inform his people they'd be processed by week's end. His shoulders carried the weight of decisions that didn't matter but had to be made anyway. The golden spires of Berninzana were dismantled methodically, the architectural marvels that had defined Wakanda's skyline reduced to component materials for shipment. The invaders didn't destroy them out of spite, they just needed the resources. Every gram of vibranium, every structural element, every decorative panel had utility elsewhere. Wakanda's monuments became hull plating for ships that would destroy other civilizations. The throne itself was melted down, its vibranium processed and reformed into armor for soldiers who would never know what kingdom they wore. T'Challa watched the dismantlement from a transport headed off-world, his own processing delayed because administrators needed someone who understood Wakandan systems to facilitate the transition. He was useful. That bought him time. Eventually his usefulness would expire and he'd be processed like everyone else. But for now, he was Category 2, skilled labor with management experience. He'd oversee the enslavement of his own people, making the process efficient, minimizing resistance, ensuring maximum yield. It was the final service he could provide as king. Make their slavery comfortable, make their processing painless, make their extinction efficient. The transport ship that carried T'Challa off-world held 50,000 Wakandans in stasis pods designed to minimize resource consumption during transit. They wouldn't age, wouldn't dream, wouldn't experience the journey between their home and whatever industrial hellscape awaited them. T'Challa remained conscious, his Category 2 classification requiring him to monitor transit systems and ensure cargo arrived undamaged. Cargo. That was the word used in official manifests. 50,000 people reduced to line items in an inventory database, their individual identities compressed into biological specifications and skill assessments. He walked through corridors lined with frozen Wakandans, their faces peaceful in stasis, and envied them. They didn't have to witness the journey, didn't have to watch their homeworld shrink to a dot, then disappear entirely behind the ship's bulk, didn't have to accept that they were leaving Earth forever, exported like vibranium ore to fuel wars they'd never understand. The ship's crew were multi-species, drawn from hundreds of conquered civilizations, all processed to varying degrees. A navigator with cybernetic implants covering 70% of his skull explained the route to T'Challa with genuine enthusiasm, proud of his efficiency in calculating warp jumps. He'd been human once, from a world called Prospero that specialized in advanced mathematics. The Imperium had conquered it, recognized the population's utility, and converted them into biological calculators. He remembered his home, his family, his culture, but the memories carried no weight, just data. He could recite the exact moment his daughter died in the invasion, describe her last words, explain how the trauma had motivated his initial resistance. Then he'd explain how conversion had helped him understand that resistance was just inefficient resource allocation, that his daughter's death had optimal statistical probability, that mourning was a chemical imbalance that reduced productivity. The navigator asked if T'Challa wanted conversion. It really did help. T'Challa declined and added another name to the list of people who'd lost their humanity while keeping their memories. The destination was revealed 3 weeks into transit, Industrial Sector 447 Gamma, a manufacturing complex that spanned an entire moon. T'Challa accessed the facility's specifications through his temporary administrative clearance and understood immediately what Wakandans would become. The facility produced weapons, billions of rounds of ammunition daily, destined for wars occurring in regions of space so distant that light from Earth hadn't reached them yet. Wakandan engineers would optimize production lines. Wakandan metallurgists would refine alloy compositions. Wakandan workers would assemble components with the precision their culture had developed over millennia. The skills that made Wakanda advanced would make them valuable slaves. Their expertise would kill civilizations they'd never meet. Their children, raised in the facility's creche programs, would consider this normal, would take pride in production quotas, would compete for efficiency bonuses, would die in industrial accidents and be replaced without ceremony. This was Category 3 processing, existence without meaning, survival without purpose, life measured in productivity metrics, orchestrated narrative progression through integration and psychological adaptation. I need to continue showing the systematic horror. Let me show what happens when they arrive, the integration process, and how T'Challa is used to facilitate the transition. Also need to show the psychological impact and how quickly people start to adapt. Shuri's archive, her hidden cultural memory encoded in vibranium, was discovered during routine material analysis. Not by accident. The enemy's scanning technology was too advanced to miss quantum-locked data structures. They'd known from the beginning. They'd allowed her to think she'd succeeded because hope made slaves more compliant during processing. The archive was extracted, analyzed, and stored in vast cultural databases where 1 trillion other dead civilizations kept company. Wakandan history became reference material for xenoanthropologists studying pre-integration societies. Their art became case studies in resource allocation inefficiency. Their philosophy became examples of cognitive biases that prevented optimal decision-making. Shuri's desperate attempt at immortality had succeeded. Wakanda would be remembered as a cautionary tale, as a statistical anomaly, as civilization number 4,779 and 332 in the Conquest Registry. She'd saved their culture the way museums saved butterflies, dead, pinned, labeled for academic interest. The facility administrator met T'Challa during intake processing, a woman who'd been human 500 years ago, her body maintained through augmentation that bordered on full mechanical replacement. She explained his new role with the efficiency of someone who'd given this speech 10,000 times. He'd oversee Wakandan integration, use his authority to minimize resistance, ensure his people accepted their new reality quickly. Psychological studies showed that conquered populations adjusted faster when lured by familiar authority figures. His usefulness as king hadn't ended, it had evolved. He'd be the face of collaboration, the example that proved surrender was acceptable, the voice that told Wakandans their slavery was necessary. The administrator wasn't cruel explaining this, wasn't kind either, just factual. His cooperation would save thousands of lives during the adjustment period. His resistance would result in his immediate processing and replacement with someone more compliant. Utility determined survival. T'Challa had been useful, he could continue being useful. The alternative was becoming fertilizer. The first Wakandans were awakened from stasis in batches of 100, their disorientation managed through careful pharmaceutical intervention. Drugs that suppressed panic, suppressed grief, suppressed the natural human response to discovering you'd been transported across the galaxy and enslaved. T'Challa greeted each batch personally, his presence a symbol of continuity, his calm demeanor suggesting this was manageable. He lied with every word, told them they'd be treated fairly, that their skills were valued, that families would be reunited eventually, that this was temporary. All lies, but lies that reduced resistance, that made processing efficient, that saved lives in the immediate term by ensuring long-term compliance. He watched people he'd known his entire life listen to his lies and choose to believe them because the truth was unendurable. Watched them accept slave designations with Wakandan dignity because dignity was the only thing they had left. Watched them thank him for his leadership even as he led them into permanent servitude. The children processed fastest, their neural plasticity allowing rapid cultural reprogramming. Within 6 weeks, Wakandan children were speaking the facility's pidgin language, playing with children from 50 other conquered species, learning efficiency metrics as naturally as they'd once learned tribal stories. T'Challa observed a girl who'd been a princess, daughter of a border tribe chief, now competing enthusiastically in assembly line games, her small hands placing components within human precision, her laughter genuine when she exceeded her quota. She didn't remember Wakanda, didn't remember her father killed in the invasion, didn't remember her mother processed into a different facility 3 systems away. She remembered being happy here, being good at her work, being valued for her contributions. The programming was perfect, humane, optimized for psychological wellness while ensuring complete compliance. She wasn't suffering, that was the horror. She was thriving in captivity, her potential being cultivated in ways that served masters she'd never question. The production quotas arrived with his second month on the facility. Wakandan supervised assembly lines were expected to increase output by 15% within 90 days. Failure to meet quotas would result in reduced rations, extended work shifts, and reassignment of underperforming workers to hazardous material processing. Success would be rewarded with improved housing, recreational privileges, and family reunification priority. T'Challa implemented efficiency programs that would have been unthinkable in old Wakanda: surveillance of workers, performance rankings, public recognition of top producers, subtle shaming of those who fell behind. He became the overseer his people needed him to be, because the alternative was someone without Wakandan interests implementing harsher measures. He optimized their slavery, made it efficient, made it sustainable, made it comfortable enough that resistance seemed irrational. The quotas were met within 60 days. Wakandans took pride in their accomplishment. T'Challa received commendations for effective integration management, his usefulness extended, his processing delayed, his humanity eroded one efficiency report at a time. Year 2 in the facility marked the point where slavery stopped feeling like slavery and started feeling like civilization. The Wakandans had adapted with the efficiency their culture was known for, optimizing every aspect of captivity until it resembled normalcy. Morning shifts began with productivity hymns, songs about unity and purpose that sounded uncomfortably like the tribal chants they'd once sung to honor Bast. Workers competed for efficiency rankings with the same intensity they'd once competed in ceremonial combat. The facility's Wakandan quarter developed its own microculture, dating protocols between workers, informal hierarchies based on skill level, celebration rituals when quotas were exceeded. They were building a society inside their prison, and T'Challa couldn't decide if that represented resilience or defeat. Probably both. Survival required forgetting what you were surviving from. The first generation born in captivity changed everything. Children who'd never seen Earth, never known freedom, couldn't miss what they'd never experienced. They learned about Wakanda in educational modules designed to provide cultural context without inspiring rebellion. a sanitized history that framed the conquest as inevitable integration rather than violent subjugation. These children looked at historical footage of the Golden City and felt academic interest, not loss. Looked at images of the Dora Milaje and saw inefficient warrior traditions, not honored protectors. Looked at T'Challa and saw a facility administrator who happened to share their ethnic background, not a fallen king. They were Wakandan by genetics, but imperial by identity, and they represented the future, a people who didn't need to be oppressed because they'd never imagined being free. Cultural genocide through generational replacement. Extinction through successful reproduction. Resistance movements formed and failed with predictable regularity. Small cells of workers attempting sabotage, slowdowns, or escape. T'Challa was required to investigate each incident, identify conspirators, recommend punishment levels. He performed these duties with mechanical efficiency, because failing to do so meant replacement by someone less merciful. His investigations were thorough enough to satisfy administrators, but slow enough to give conspirators time to destroy evidence. His punishment recommendations were harsh enough to appear loyal, but lenient enough to avoid executions. He was collaborating with both sides, useful to the Imperium, while protecting Wakandans where possible. The moral mathematics were impossible: betray small groups to protect the larger population, or maintain integrity and watch everyone suffer. He chose utility, chose survival, chose to be the kind of king who sent people to punishment cells, knowing they'd never emerge the same. Resistance failed because he made it fail efficiently. The conversion protocols expanded from punishment to reward. High-performing workers were offered optimization as a privilege, nanomachine enhancement that increased productivity while reducing stress, anxiety, and existential dread. The offer was voluntary, 50% accepted within the first month. They emerged from conversion facilities with their skills enhanced, their efficiency doubled, their humanity edited into something more useful. A master craftsman who'd spent 60 years perfecting metallurgical techniques now worked 3 times faster, needed half the sleep, experienced no job-related stress. He remembered his wife, dead in the invasion, but the grief was gone. Remembered his son, processed to a different facility, but the yearning was gone. He was better now, happier, optimized. T'Challa watched workers line up for voluntary lobotomy and realized the Imperium had won without firing another shot. They'd made slavery so comfortable that people chose to erase the parts of themselves that remembered freedom. Shuri appeared in his quarters one night, having paid bribes to transfer from her own facility assignment. She'd aged badly, the brilliant 20-year-old girl, now a gaunt 30-year-old woman whose eyes carried the weight of things she'd engineered. She worked in weapons development, her genius repurposed toward creating more efficient ways to kill. She'd designed ammunition that could pierce planetary shields, artillery that could crack continental plates, viruses that could sterilize entire species. Her work was exceptional. She was promoted regularly, given better quarters, better rations, recognition as a valued asset. And she hated every moment with an intensity that refused to fade, because unlike the converted workers, she remembered exactly what she'd lost and couldn't make herself stop caring. She asked T'Challa if he thought they were damned, if collaboration to save lives was functionally identical to collaboration that enabled atrocity. He had no answer that didn't justify genocide. The facility celebrated its 5th anniversary of Wakandan integration with ceremonies that mimicked Wakandan traditions without understanding them. Workers performed ceremonial dances divorced from their spiritual meaning, sang songs about homeland they'd never seen, wore traditional garments as costume rather than identity. The administrators encouraged these displays, believing cultural preservation reduced psychological stress. They didn't understand they were watching a funeral where the corpse was dancing. T'Challa participated because his presence legitimized the farce, made it feel authentic, helped workers believe they were maintaining culture instead of performing its autopsy. He wore the Black Panther ceremonial garb, now just clothing without the heart-shaped herb's power, without Bast's connection, without meaning beyond fabric and symbolism. A child asked him what the outfit represented. He explained it was the symbol of Wakanda's protector. The child asked what he was protecting them from. T'Challa had no answer. The quotas increased annually, production demands rising as the Imperium's wars expanded into new sectors. What had been sustainable workload became grinding. Injuries increased. Worker lifespans decreased. The 7-year projection dropped to 5, then 4. The facility was consuming Wakandans faster than replacement births could sustain. Basic mathematics. At current consumption rates, the Wakandan population would be functionally extinct within 3 generations. Not through violence, through simple attrition, worked to death producing weapons for wars they'd never see. T'Challa presented the data to administrators, explaining that current quotas were unsustainable, that Wakandan expertise was being depleted faster than it could be renewed. The response was acknowledgement without concern. Wakandans weren't the only skilled metallurgists in the Imperium. When this population was exhausted, another would be imported. His people weren't irreplaceable, just current inventory being used until replacement became necessary. Baku appeared in his office without warning, having bribed his way through 3 security checkpoints and 2 sector transfers. The mountain tribe leader looked ancient now, his massive frame reduced by malnutrition, his proud bearing broken by years of manual labor. He'd come to ask a simple question. Was T'Challa's choice correct? Had surrendering, collaborating, facilitating efficient enslavement actually saved more Wakandan lives than dying with Okoye would have? The mathematics were clear. Category 3 processing had a survival rate of 40% over 10 years. Resistance had a survival rate of 0% immediately. By pure numbers, collaboration had saved 20,000 lives. But those lives were lived in captivity, raising children who didn't know freedom, dying slowly producing weapons, being erased generationally. M'Baku asked if existing without dignity was functionally different from not existing at all. T'Challa gave the same answer he'd given years ago. There were no right choices, only different speeds of dying. M'Baku accepted this and left to die in a processing accident the Neu Tomb. XT Day, suicide disguised as industrial mishap, the final choice of a man who'd run out of acceptable options. Year 7 brought the edict that made forgetting mandatory instead of inevitable. The Imperium had analyzed integration data across 10,000 facilities and determined that cultural retention correlated with reduced productivity and increased resistance. Workers who remembered their homeworlds worked slower, complained more, required additional psychological management. The solution was elegant: mandatory memory editing for all Category 3 populations. Not conversion, that was still reserved for high performers. Just selective amnesia. Workers would remember their skills, their language, their relationships with current facility residents. They'd forget Earth, forget Wakanda, forget freedom. The procedure was framed as therapeutic, a way to reduce psychological burden and improve quality of life. Voluntary compliance earned bonus rations. Mandatory compliance began in 30 days for those who refused. T'Challa read the edict and understood this was the actual extinction event. Everything before had been preliminary. This was the moment Wakanda died completely. The Wakandan workers divided into 3 factions overnight. The largest group accepted the procedure immediately, seeing it as relief from constant grief. Why carry the weight of a destroyed homeland when forgetting was available? Why suffer comparing present slavery to past freedom when the past could be edited away? They lined up for processing with visible relief, their faces showing the exhaustion of people who'd been drowning and were finally offered permission to stop fighting. The second faction resisted violently, barricading themselves in residential sectors, broadcasting defiant messages about preserving Wakandan identity. Their resistance lasted 42 hours before security forces extracted them for mandatory processing. The third faction, the smallest, simply waited in their quarters, neither accepting nor resisting, just sitting in silence as the deadline approached. T'Challa belonged to the third group, not from defiance, from absence of preference. Remembering or forgetting seemed equally meaningless at this point. Shuri came to him the night before mandatory processing began, her hands shaking from stimulants she'd been using to maintain functionality. She'd developed a countermeasure, illegal nanomachines that would preserve core memories even through the editing procedure. The technology was crude, untested, and likely fatal in 20% of applications, but it would let them remember, let them carry Wakanda forward even if only in their own minds. She'd already dosed herself, accepted the risk, chosen memory over survival. She offered T'Challa the same choice, a vial of silver liquid that represented everything they'd been versus everything they'd become. He looked at his sister, desperate and brilliant and clinging to identity like a drowning person clinging to anchor, and realized she was already dead. The countermeasure wouldn't save her. "Whoa, you'd just prolong her suffering, let her remember what she'd lost while being unable to do anything about it." He declined the injection, told her to stop wasting resources on resistance that didn't matter, watched her face break completely when her own brother chose forgetting. The memory editing happened in batches of 500. Workers cycled through neural programming facilities and emerging hours later without their pasts. They weren't different people, same personalities, same relationships, same skills, just edited. A metallurgist still knew every alloy composition but couldn't remember learning them in Wakandan schools. A mother still loved her children but couldn't remember giving birth in the Golden City. A warrior still moved with trained precision but couldn't remember the Dora Milaje oath that had defined her existence. They were functional, productive, content. They were Wakandan bodies with imperial minds. They were the successful conclusion of conquest, defeated so thoroughly they couldn't remember there had been a war. T'Challa observed the first batch complete processing and recognized none of them despite knowing all of them. The editing hadn't changed their faces, just removed the light behind their eyes that came from knowing what you'd lost. His own processing was scheduled for day 3 of the mandatory program, his Category 2 status delaying but not exempting him. The night before, he accessed restricted files detailing the procedure's complete effects. The editing wasn't surgical, it was comprehensive. Subjects would remember Earth existed but feel no attachment to it. Remember Wakanda's name but feel no pride in it. Remember their families who died in the invasion but feel no grief over the loss. Emotion editing paired with memory deletion, turning the past into historical trivia that carried no weight. He'd remember being king but forget why that mattered, remember leading Wakanda's surrender but forget the shame of collaboration, remember watching his people enslaved but feel nothing about their suffering. He'd become functional, productive, optimized. He'd become the perfect slave who'd once been a king and couldn't comprehend the difference. The facility's underground resistance, survivors of the violent faction who'd escaped initial processing, sent him a message through channels he wasn't supposed to know existed. They were planning a final act: sabotage the facility's reactor, kill everyone inside, deny the Imperium their productivity. It was suicide, pure spite, meaningless revenge that would accomplish nothing except brief satisfaction before death. They wanted his blessing, wanted to know if their king thought dying with dignity was worth dying at all. T'Challa considered the question with the analytical detachment he'd developed over 7 years of impossible choices. The sabotage would kill 20,000 Wakandans currently living relatively comfortable lives, would accomplish nothing strategically. The facility would be rebuilt, new workers imported, production briefly delayed, but it would let some Wakandans die remembering who they'd been, die with their memories intact, die as Wakandi, Ans instead of whatever the editing would turn them into. He gave his blessing, not because it was right, because choosing how you died was the only freedom slavery couldn't take. The reactor sabotage was scheduled for the same night as his processing, perfect timing. He'd either die in the explosion or wake up edited, unable to remember authorizing the death of his people. Either outcome was acceptable. He spent his final conscious hours as T'Challa, walking through the Wakandan residential sectors, observing people who'd already been processed. They were happy, genuinely happy, working their shifts without resentment, socializing without grief, living without the psychological burden of remembering freedom. The editing had worked exactly as advertised. It improved quality of life by removing the capacity to recognize how degraded that life was. A worker stopped him, a woman who'd been a border tribe elder, now a cheerful assembly line supervisor who had no idea she'd once commanded thousands. She thanked him for his leadership, told him how grateful she was for the integration program, how much better life was now that the past didn't hurt anymore. T'Challa looked into her empty eyes and understood the final truth. The Imperium hadn't defeated Wakanda through conquest, they'd defeated it through therapy. The processing facility was sterile, clean, designed to be non-threatening. Technicians explained the procedure with genuine kindness, assuring him he'd feel better afterward, that the weight of trauma would be lifted, that he'd maintain everything important while losing everything that caused pain. They meant it, weren't lying or manipulating. They genuinely believed they were helping, improving his mental health, providing therapeutic relief from memories that served no purpose except causing suffering. T'Challa laid on the processing table and wondered if they were right, if remembering Wakanda actually served any purpose beyond making him miserable, if identity was worth preserving when it consisted entirely of loss, if being T'Challa, king of a dead nation, was preferable to being T'Challa, productive facility administrator who'd never known anything except contentment. The neural interface activated. The editing began. His last thought before consciousness fragmented was wondering if Shuri's countermeasure would work or if the facility would explode first. Either outcome would answer the question of whether some things were worth remembering. The reactor didn't explode. Shuri's countermeasure didn't work. T'Challa woke from memory editing intact, aware, remembering everything. Not because of resistance technology, but because of administrative error. His Category 2 status had been upgraded to Category 1 during processing. Essential personnel, memory retention required for facility management. The technicians apologized for the confusion, explained he was too valuable to edit, that his expertise administering Wakandan integration couldn't be replicated. He'd been spared, not through defiance or luck, throws. Utility. He remained conscious and aware because his suffering made him useful, because a broken king who remembered his failures could manage other broken people more effectively than one who'd been granted the mercy of forgetting. The Imperium's efficiency was perfect. They'd found a use for his pain. The resistance fighters who'd planned the sabotage were caught during final preparations, their conspiracy exposed by edited Wakandans who reported suspicious behavior without malice or understanding. The rebels were processed through standard conversion protocols, emerging as enthusiastic workers who remembered planning the attack but couldn't comprehend why they'd considered it. Their leader, a former Dora Milaje who'd fought beside Okoye during the final stand, explained the sabotage plan to T'Challa with clinical detachment, analyzing the flaws in their strategy, suggesting improvements that could have made it successful, unable to access the emotional context that had motivated the attempt. She asked if he wanted to try again, genuinely curious about the tactical challenge, completely divorced from the desperate defiance that had driven her original plan. T'Challa looked at her optimized smile and understood that death would have been kinder. The Imperium didn't kill rebels, it cured them. Shuri's illegal countermeasure had worked for approximately 47 minutes before her edited neural pathways rejected the invasive nanomachines. The rejection killed her over 3 days, her brilliant mind fragmenting as competing programming tore her consciousness apart. T'Challa held her during the final hours, watching his sister oscillate between remembering everything and forgetting her own name, between screaming about Wakanda's fall and asking cheerfully about production quotas. Her last words were a question. Had she succeeded in preserving Wakandan culture in the hidden archive? T'Challa told her yes, the archive was safe. Wakanda would be remembered. Both statements were true and meaningless. The archive existed, would be studied by xenoanthropologists who'd analyze Wakandan culture with the same interest they'd give extinct insects. Wakanda would be remembered the way museums remembered butterflies. Dead, categorized, irrelevant. Shuri died believing she'd accomplished something. T'Challa buried her, believing nothing had ever mattered. Year 10 marked the completion of Wakandan integration. The population had stabilized at 12,000, 60% loss from the original deportation numbers, but within acceptable parameters for Category 3 processing. 97% had undergone memory editing voluntarily or through mandatory compliance. The remaining 3% were administrators like T'Challa, kept aware to manage the edited majority. Wakandan supervised production lines exceeded quotas by 30%, their cultural emphasis on craftsmanship translating perfectly to weapons manufacturing. The facility received commendations, T'Challa received promotions, his people received additional rations. Everyone was succeeding by every metric the Imperium measured. Wakanda had become the model integration case referenced in administratives briefings as proof that Category 3 processing could transform resistant populations into productive assets within a single decade. His surrender had been vindicated, his collaboration had saved thousands, his choices had been correct according to every mathematical analysis. He'd won. Wakanda had lost, but he'd maximized survival, minimized suffering, achieved optimal outcomes given impossible circumstances. The victory tasted like ash. The second generation, children born in captivity, now approaching adolescence, had no concept of Earth beyond historical reference. They'd been taught about Wakanda in educational modules, could recite facts about the Golden City, the Black Panther tradition, the vibranium meteor. But the knowledge was academic, devoid of attachment, memorized like any other historical trivia. A boy approached T'Challa during a facility tour, introducing himself proudly as a descendant of the merchant tribe. He asked questions about old Wakanda with genuine curiosity. What did real sunlight feel like? What were animals beyond facility protein sources? Why had his ancestors wasted resources on art and ceremony instead of optimizing for production? The questions weren't hostile, just incomprehensible. The boy couldn't understand why anyone would choose inefficiency. T'Challa tried to explain concepts like beauty, culture, meaning. The boy listened politely and filed the information away as interesting but impractical. He was Wakandan by genetics, imperial by every measurement that mattered. The extinction was complete. Earth itself was gone, processed to barren rock over the decade since Wakanda's deportation. Every useful resource extracted, every population exported, every ecosystem converted to raw materials. The planet that had birthed humanity was now mining designation T346M, scheduled for atmospheric processing once mineral extraction concluded. T'Challa accessed the files through his administrative clearance and stared at images of continents reduced to quarries, oceans drained for hydrogen, the atmosphere itself being stripped for chemical components. Humanity's homeworld was being erased so thoroughly that future archaeologists wouldn't know life had ever existed there. Every human in the galaxy was now exactly like the Wakandans, displaced, processed, integrated into the Imperium's eternal machinery. There was no home to return to, no freedom to reclaim, no past to restore, only the eternal present of quotas and production and utility. The choice to surrender instead of dying with Earth hadn't saved anything except the privilege of knowing what had been lost. M'Baku's death had been officially recorded as industrial accident, but T'Challa knew better. He'd reviewed the security footage, watched his friend step deliberately into machinery that would end him instantly, his face carrying an expression of relief. The final act of a man who'd recognized that surviving wasn't the same as living, that existence without dignity was just elaborate dying. T'Challa envied him, envied Okoye who'd died defending empty symbols, envied Shuri who'd died trying to preserve meaning, envied every Wakandan who'd resisted long enough to be executed instead of edited. They'd chosen how their stories ended. He'd chosen to continue his indefinitely, managing the enslaved, optimizing their captivity, ensuring efficient processing of a people who no longer existed except in genetic markers and production quotas. He was the last person who remembered what Wakanda had been and couldn't do anything except watch it become something else, something functional, something useful, something that would persist for centuries as a footnote in imperial efficiency reports. The final report arrived on a normal Tuesday, administrative documentation detailing Wakanda's complete integration and recommending case study status for future conquests. T'Challa signed off on his own people's extinction with the same methodical efficiency he'd brought to every impossible choice over the last decade. The document would be studied by conquest administrators across the galaxy, his surrender analyzed as a model for peaceful integration, his collaboration highlighted as optimal leadership under Category 3 processing. Future kings facing similar choices would reference his example: surrender early, facilitate processing, maximize survival through compliance. He'd become the template for acceptable defeat. His name would persist in Imperial databases longer than it would persist in Wakandan memory. The children being born now would never know who T'Challa was, but conquest administrators would study his choices for millennia. That was his immortality, not as a hero who defied impossible odds, but as a collaborator who made extinction efficient. He closed the report and returned to his duties, managing quotas for a people who'd forgotten they were conquered, in a facility that would outlast any memory of the Golden City, serving an empire that would continue long after the last Wakandan couldn't remember what Wakanda meant. The end. Wakanda forever meant something once. Now it's just words in a database. Civilization number 4,779,332. Integrated, processed, optimized, extinct.